Yeah. So it did get controversial. My position is transparency.
Mm-hmm.
We have to be transparent in any decision we are making in government, and to put these officers who are literally, the proper role of government is to protect life, liberty, and property. That is exactly what our first responders are doing, is they are fulfilling the proper role of government. They should be line item number one in a budget, is public safety. That's why government formed in the first place, is public safety. So to put them down here and say, oh, we've spent all this money on golf course clubhouses and all these other things, and oh, we just don't have enough money to pay our officers properly, so we're going to have to raise your taxes. No, that's not how this works. Let's fund them first. And then if there's some lower priority items that there's not funding for, then we need to be transparent with the public of, hey, if we want these things in the community, we're going to have to raise taxes. Or we're going to have to find a private way to raise those funds, or some other avenue, right? So that was brought up, and Paula Smith is one who was very active in reaching out to the council and digging through the line items of the budget and saying, well, what about this? What about that? And the level of questions were so intelligent. I'm like, wow, this woman knows her stuff.
Yeah.
And so I have no doubt that she will be one who can get in there, hit the ground running. She's all about eliminating waste. She understands the proper role of government. So I really appreciate that about Paula.
Well, you would think that if people did this, I mean, this is how you should run your personal finances.
Yes.
Right? It's like you have priorities, and then, you know, and people with messed up finances, they put their priorities at the bottom, kind of like you're talking about, and they play first and, you know, save last or invest last. And it's obvious in their life, and it's obviously happening to government. So to me, it's common sense. I don't understand. But would you agree that it's the reason why most of these issues have happened was because of these private institutions that are really controlling elected officials, and then the public isn't involved enough to really know what's happening, and these people that are influencing our local governments know that these people aren't, the community's not really involved?
I would say that's the number one issue, is lack of community involvement. And we all get busy. I get it. I was that way for years up until 2020, where it's like I was in grad school. I was raising young kids. You know, we're so busy in our day-to-day lives. We have to prioritize what's going on in our local communities, though.
Well, I think an element of that, too, is people are just, they're not aware. They're not educated. They don't even know the principles that this whole country was even established upon, right?
It surprises me when we were trying to get this zoning changed on this piece of property. We would go to these city council meetings, and I was surprised. Everybody there was 70 or 80 or older. I was by far the youngest person in the room. And one time we invited a bunch of our friends to get there and just see what happened. And then the whole room was packed full, which was cool. But prior to that, if they didn't have gray or silver hair, they were, you know, everybody there was older.
Right.
And I've always said, you know, I've always lived in communities. Like right now I live in a community. I'm by far the youngest person. Everybody there's pretty much retired. And I've always told my wife, I choose to live where older people live because they have wisdom. You know, and you always look, if you follow these people, they have wisdom, and you go, oh, this is why they live here. It's a good community to live in.
Right.
And I think the same thing with politics, you know, so if there's a lot of older people there, we should probably be paying attention to that stuff because they've been around long enough to know this is what matters.
Right.
And it's not that they don't have stuff to do as well. They just have enough wisdom to know this matters, and it makes our community better, right?
Absolutely. And I love those meetings where we get a big turnout because truly, that's where we take this country back. That's where we restore principles, as it starts right there. And I know not all elected representatives feel that way. I think there's some who would be more than happy if nobody showed up and they could just do their thing behind the scenes and no one's really paying attention. But that's part of the reason for the podcast that I recently started, is I feel like the word needs to get out there, especially here locally. There needs to be that transparency and an avenue of getting out information, because so many times people will tell me, I had no idea this was going on in our city, or I had no idea this council person donated this money to this leftist organization, or I had no idea this meeting was coming up, or that they were even trying to raise taxes. And so having an avenue where people can go and be informed on some of these issues, I think is really important.
Yeah, that's awesome. So your podcast, what's the name of your podcast?
The Michelle Tanner Podcast.
Okay, so Michelle Tanner, and how do you spell your last name?
Tanner.
Okay, so Michelle Tanner Podcast, and it's available on all streaming platforms?
Yep, all of your major podcast streaming platforms, Rumble, awesome. YouTube, Apple, Amazon, all of those.
So then in addition to your podcast, if somebody, whether they're from Southern Utah or somewhere else, like where does somebody go to find out where city council meetings are happening? Where do they find out the agendas and all this kind of stuff? How do people get that information other than your podcast?
Yeah, so everything is public on sgcity.org. So all of the minutes from the meetings have to legally be posted on there. Agendas for upcoming meetings have to legally be posted on there. All of our meetings, excluding very few issues, are open to the public, open public meetings every Thursday, 5 p.m. So, yeah.
And is that how most cities have? So if somebody's in St. George, that's how they can go find all those. So is most cities, that's the way it works, right?
Yep. And that's a state code that the Open Public Meetings Act, things have to be done. And I assume most states are going to be the same way.
And have something similar.
Mm-hmm.
So,
yes.
Okay. Awesome.
Yeah.
Did you know all that? Have you ever?
Well, I was just going to say. I mean, just what the word that just keeps coming to my mind is awareness. I mean, I didn't get into even paying attention to politics until I was in my mid-20s. Just never paid attention. I paid attention to the President of the United States and who was running there, and that's about all I knew. And I think that's probably the case still today, and it's because that's the loudest part that's out there, but that's where we have the least impact.
Exactly.
And all of this local, down at the local level, I mean, I think once people become aware of these donations that are happening to certain areas, and we're all passionate people when it comes to our, like you said, our families earlier, right? Our kids and our communities. But if we are not aware of what's going on and what we can do to maybe help those situations, we can't do anything about it. So
exactly.
I just think like your podcast, or even like this podcast. I mean, people come to this podcast to learn about business or finance or fitness or whatever. But I think it's nice to get on once in a while and go, oh, wow, I need to pay attention at my local level and then see what's going on. And that's just what I'm thinking.
Yeah, because the fact is, you're going to live in a certain area and you do have influence if you're aware enough to know where your energy can be put in order to change certain things in your community. Because in what I've seen, based on the meetings that I've gone to and the ones that I've watched, I know some of them are even online. I don't know, they're all online
now.
Okay.
All of our every other week.
Okay, every other.
Online.
Okay.
Yes.
Yeah. So, and I've been surprised by if I just let someone know that they would hop on and go, oh my gosh, I can't believe that is happening. Yeah. Right.
See, they should be doing this in school. They should be getting on with in high school kids and saying, "Hey, here's what's happening at a local level."
And I think they do.
Happen.
No, I actually think,
do they do that?
Yeah. So I had a
it never
teacher,
happened in my high school.
Mrs. Abernathy. Shout out Miss Abernathy. I don't know. I know she's here. Well,
you got to remember though. How long ago were you in school?
She still runs a magazine here locally.
Okay, maybe she still does.
So what school were you at?
Snow Canyon.
Okay.
And she was awesome, but the problem is I just didn't care. I couldn't see how it changed my life at all because it didn't. I didn't have any responsibilities, right? Because in high school, you're not thinking about responsibilities. You're just trying to have fun. And I think even a lot of college students are the same way.
Yeah.
So like
that's how I was.
For me, I remember actually I got into a conversation with Sherry Bone one time at your office, and that's really what made me think like, oh my gosh, politics do matter. And at that time, it was about the president, and I was like 21, 22. I could care less. Like to me, it didn't matter. My life was the same no matter who was president. But I remember when I had this conversation with her, I started really thinking like, oh my gosh, she's right. Like if this person is passing this law, eventually, in her whole thing, she was talking about a decision that this president had made that I didn't see how it affected my personal life. And then she started teaching me how it affected, the local governments and how decisions, and I started going, oh my gosh, it really does matter.
Yeah.
At the end of the day, it does matter. But prior to that, it didn't matter to me because I didn't have any personal responsibilities. And at this point in my life, it was someone willing to say something and willing, because she was super passionate about politics. Yeah. And I just thought it didn't matter at all because I was just this young kid, And And then when she was willing to say something and willing to be, I guess, controversial enough because it wasn't a comfortable conversation. I'm sure you've had a lot of those conversations being in politics, that I left that conversation. She probably just thought that I didn't listen, didn't hear, but I left it being inquisitive, like, man, maybe I should pay more attention. And then it did. It did make me far more aware of what was happening. In fact, I remember at that point, like Obama was running, and I remember, Kelsey's like, doesn't even matter. And I'm like, no, this dude is going to win. And I could just tell by his charisma, the way he talked, and all of a sudden people thought there's no way. Like, nobody knew who he was. And I just thought, like, he's going to win, and it is going to matter, and here's why. And then now we can look back and go, oh my gosh, it did change our country. Whether you were for him or against him, it changed our country. And so you can see how much politics really did matter. And I think now looking back, we're all just old enough to be aware enough about how much that changed our country. But it happened with previous presidents as well. You can go look at every administration throughout the history of our country and realize it changed our country in one direction or another, right? And so I think being aware enough about the impact of local politics and how it really does change the horizon of regional politics or federal politics.
Absolutely.
It makes an impact. It really does.
And
right?
that's why it's so vital that children are receiving the proper education, not the indoctrination that they are literally receiving in our public schools and even charter school.
Yeah.
At least one that I know of here.
Yeah.
Because they are the future, right? Yes. There's been polls done where it's like up to 70% of you think, oh, we don't need the Constitution.
Yeah.
They don't even understand the Constitution.
They've never even read it.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And so it's our responsibility as parents to, number one, make sure we're educating our own kids. But I'm still passionate about the school system and doing everything I can within my power to make sure that we are teaching correct principles and not indoctrination in these schools, because they are who are going to carry on this country. And it's frightening to think some of the things they're being taught and that they're going to be the ones taking over.
What's frightening to me is most parents that have children in schools, they have never read the Constitution. They've never read the Bill of Rights. They've never read the Declaration of Independence. I remember I'd get in these arguments with people about politics, and I would say, how many people signed the Declaration of Independence? And they couldn't tell me. And it was like, you don't know these like fundamental principles of what makes our country special, and yet you have an opinion about something you have really no knowledge about. Like, how can you have an opinion on something you have no knowledge about? So I think that's a big problem, because they don't have any knowledge, so they leave it up to these teachers at school.
Right.
They don't know what their kids are being taught because they don't know what they believe themselves.
Right.